around, I'd finally see I think I need a change. The rat race, I wanna flee, my world I'll rearrange. I'm getting back to the roots of how it's meant to be. Growing gardens, picking fruit, racing livestock, living free. It's a modern homestead. Build a modern homestead.
Well, hello and welcome to the Modern Homesteading Podcast. I'm your host, Harold Thornbrough, and I'm joined today by Ashley Burton of Mulberry Branch Farm here in Indiana, and she's a homesteader of a few years. I think you said you've been doing about 13 years, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, Ashley, welcome to the Modern Homesteading Podcast.
Well, Harold, thank you so much for having me. And like you said, we're here in Indiana. We're located pretty east central. We could throw a stone over into Ohio. So spend a lot of time, back and forth over state lines. But we started our homesteading journey here about 13 years ago. And it was kind of all happened really fast. And the reason that happened really fast is, I just got married. We were getting ready to have our first daughter, and we were living, like most people do, starting off with their parents sometimes.
Yeah.
And found this land, 13 acres of retired cornfield. And I thought to myself, that is just a perfect place to start our homestead. And moved here, built the house. And I was kind of one of those people that I just didn't really understand ecologies of soil health or soil biology. And I figured that is an old cornfield that's been worked agriculturally for years.
I was just going to ask you about that.
Grow anything there. I was like, dirt is dirt. And if they've grown that much food there over the years, then it should just be ripping to go. And learned the hard way after lots of tries with the garden and had to really learn how to amend soils. And that's really how we started homesteading.
Wow. So
we built up the house, the gardens needed amended, and we bought goats, and then we had chickens, and then we've had ducks, and we've had miniature donkeys. We beekeep, we do all the things because those are the things that as we brought them in, it just kind of healed our land and helped us to be better stewards and helped us to reap more abundant harvests. And really, that's what everybody that gets into this lifestyle wants. They want that Instagram worthy, the YouTube worthy gardens. But a lot of times you don't get to see how people get there, So we've learned a lot in our 13 years of being here on our property.
Yeah. Well, I want to get into all that, but I want to back up first to talk about the raw land thing. I mean, cornfield. Yeah. So I mean, you probably obviously bought that because it's probably more affordable than buying land that's developed in any way. So you're putting in wells and septic systems, and you had to do the whole 9 yards. Yeah.
Yeah. We had to do the whole thing. Yeah. And we don't live off of city water. We had a well dug. We do have like a little cistern, but we kind of use that as in case something crazy happens, chemical leakage from the farmer next door who doesn't use pesticides or herbicides. Thankfully, he's
really
not like that at all. We were very lucky in that way.
Yeah.
But that's also why we have that cistern, just in case anything kind of goes awry. We've got some water saved up from our in-ground well.
So you've been there 13 years then. So I imagine you've planted lots of trees and done a lot of infrastructure and stuff. So it probably looks a lot different than cornfield now. But,
it really does.
I mean, that's really starting from scratch for sure.
Yeah. And I've always thought it was funny when people are like, I want raw land. I'm like, do you really?
Yeah, I've thought that myself a few times. I'm like, well, because that sometimes is the most affordable land to buy.
Yeah.
Some farmers just getting rid of a portion of a field or whatever. And I've thought, well, obviously, I mean, because of where I'm at, I know most farmers around here where we live just spray the tar out of everything. I mean, they dump it like water on there. And so there's a lot of it takes a long time for that stuff to really get out of the soil completely.
Yes.
It goes by half lives, and it takes a few years for it to be completely gone. So you're dealing with that. And plus, just I know what little bit of infrastructure I've put on my little piece of property. That's been a lot of work. I can't even imagine completely from just scratch starting, and just saying, okay, here we go. And you said that's worse than just say buying a hayfield or a woods or something like that. I mean, you're starting from a cornfield, which is really nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. And honestly, like I said, we kind of just mistakenly came into that. It was cheaper. And like I said, like I had no idea really at the ripe age of 21 when my daughter was born and we started looking for property that those practices were what were being used, because as a child, I grew up actually like back in the woods. My mom foraged, we had little gardens, we did horses, had chickens. So in a natural state like that in a forest, like it is constantly taking care of itself by the leaf litter and all the organic matter that's falling and decomposing and amending its own soil. So I just figured, hey, if it could do it in the forest, if a farmer's doing it, it's got to be good. And it really wasn't.
Well, let's even back up a little bit further. What made you even want to go into homesteading in the first place?
You know, I often have to ask myself that same question, even right now, because we run like a herd of almost 40 goats. And there are moments where I'm like, why in the world am I doing this to myself? This is so hard. This is tough. But really, when I look back at my childhood, even though it kind of was homesteading, like that was just our lifestyle. Like I didn't think it had a name, and I didn't think that it had its own niche. And as I got older and decided to start, filming for YouTube here on our little farm, I realized I'm like, what I'm doing is called homestead.
Yeah.
I just thought it was living, but there are so many people that, they're introduced to it through the camera lens, through our social media platforms. And as I became more involved with social media and those different platforms and kind of viewing how other people were viewing what I just thought was life, I realized it was called homesteading. Yeah. And through that way, I kind of just realized that this is just what I've been doing. But my husband has been a part of it his entire life too. He grew up on a small, what someone would call a hobby farm, even though I know as a homesteader, that's like a bad word. Nobody wants to be called a hobby farm. And I'm like, oh,
right.
We are who we are. I'm not going to stick to labels. Like I'm just living a lifestyle of simplicity and self-sufficiency and encouraging others to follow those footsteps, because it's wholesome, it's healing. And I couldn't live my life any other way. I couldn't live in an apartment. I couldn't live with, and I don't want to like discredit humanity's ability to be adaptable. But for me, I couldn't. It would drive me insane. It would drive me crazy. And, we both kind of just grew up that way. And I can kind of see neighbors, and that almost drives me nuts. And I'm like, I don't want to see anybody. I grew up in the woods.
I'm surrounded by them, so I understand what you're saying. I wish I had a little bit more distance between me and my neighbors. Yeah, it's not that I don't like my neighbors. It's just it's nice to have that. It's nice to be secluded a little bit, and be kind of separated. So you're primarily a dairy goat farm right now. That what you're I mean, you're doing a lot of things obviously, but that's your primary thing.
That's my passion.
Yeah.
I love those little goats.
I mean, was that something that it's just always been there, or is just one day you got a goat and then you just fell in love with them, or what?
Actually, as I grew up, I had horses and chickens, and I actually did shadow what is now my livestock vet. I didn't realize, back in high school, I was shadowing someone who would be on my farm helping me pull kids in difficult situations when I couldn't reposition them myself. But whenever we would go and visit farms, if they said they had goats, I was like, just instantly knew what a struggle it was going to be, because number one, like they're just small enough to outmaneuver you, but big enough to bum rush you. And they sometimes have horns and they're ornery and they have personality. So I just really hated working with them at the vet's office. I much more preferred, equines, but my husband had been raised with goats his entire life. He said, you know what, I bet if you maybe worked with them on a more personal setting, that you would actually really, really like them. So begrudgingly, when we first had our barn built, before the fences even went up, I got 2 boar goats and said, okay, let's prove me wrong, husband. And often I find that my husband is that solid foundation. Like he is the voice of reason to my type A, go, go, go. I don't want to change my mind. He's often the one that says, oh, let's try it. And I end up liking it. So the 2 goats turned into goat math. And I'm now sitting around maybe 50, because I have 21 kids that have been born so far this year, and I already had a herd of 30. So I'm sitting around 50 goats right now.
You definitely have to have a passion to go for it to go with that many goats. I like you. I mean, I grew up like your husband, I guess more. I grew up with a few goats. We had 5 or 6 dairy goats, a ram, some dairy goats, and they were a handful. Keeping them in the fence was the challenge when I was growing up. I mean, there was a few times, they tried to get on the school bus with me in the morning because they got out of the fence,
Mm-hmm.
so they would get out occasionally. And
Oh yeah.
we open the front door and they're all standing on your front porch. It's like, wait a minute, come on now.
Yeah, I hear that,
sometimes.
especially if you have bottle babies. I know we have
Yeah.
a bottle baby from last year that she has special privileges per my husband. All she has to do is yell at him as he walks out the door, and he goes and opens the gate and lets her come into the house. We have
Wow.
another bottle baby that does the same thing this year. So there's no
Yeah.
limitations for the goats, and they know that.
Yeah. I mean, they're a very beneficial animal to have on your property,
Oh, yeah.
especially if you're doing permaculture. I don't know if you get into permaculture much,
Mhm.
but in the permaculture realm, they're a really great animal
Oh,
in
yeah.
a lot of ways. I like them. It probably wouldn't be my number one animal of choice, but they're a good animal. And yeah, the milk is high quality. I mean, if it's done
Oh, yeah.
right, and what you can do with it's really, really amazing too. Now, do you sell products, or do you sell the milk, or do you sell any products that you make with the milk, or
Well, because Indiana is not all that friendly towards raw milk.
right?
I am licensed through Indiana to sell pet quality milk.
Mhm.
Now, what people decide to do with that milk after it leaves,
Gotcha.
I don't care what you do. Just don't tell me what you're going to do with it. I'm just going to. I drink pet quality milk myself. Let's
But
just put
whatever
it
they
that
want
way.
to do
Like,
with it, after they purchase
yeah,
it, it's on them, right? Yeah, exactly.
yeah, I
Yeah.
treat my pet quality milk just as I would treat the milk I feed my own family.
Hmm.
We do make cheeses. We've made butter. I'm actually sitting next to my very first order of goat milk soaps that I've
Yeah.
cut, and I'm going to have to package and send it to like a mother-daughter church event down in Kentucky. So
Yeah, that's a big business in some
it
places.
it,
Yeah.
it can be. The only bad thing that I think people don't understand about when you're creating goat milk soaps is that once they're done, like really for them to be effective and to not just dwindle down quickly, they have to cure for 4 to 6 weeks at the very least. And that's if everything settles correctly. So
Mhm.
I've had people, they're like, I want some of this batch. I'm like, I'll reach out to you in 6 weeks. And a lot of times they're like, well, why not now? And I'm like, you can use it. It just wouldn't last. It needs to harden, it needs to cure.
Yeah, I know there's a in southern Indiana, there's a big business of that down there. I bought some from them before, and but good stuff. It was really good stuff.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, there's some big business in goat milk products. I know that.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
can be a
there's
profitable
lots
business.
of benefits. And I think in America, especially, like we kind of miss out on that, even when it comes to goats as meat producers.
Mhm.
Super lean. My husband and I deer hunt every year. I don't think we've bought true meat from the supermarket outside of like fish or shrimp if we want something like exotic.
Yeah.
We haven't bought anything like that in years because we harvest our own goats or we harvest deer.
Yeah.
We grow out our own chickens, and goat meat is actually the most consumed meat per capita throughout the entire world. We're the only ones that don't do that. And I would say it's because we have lots of the ability to free graze if we believe that what people put on that package we buy at the supermarket is true and it's actually grass fed.
Yeah.
That we have lots of land where we can do that here in America, whereas other areas they don't.
Right.
Goats forage, they don't graze. Someone was asking, like, I've got a big hay field for as many goats as I want. I'm like, well, they're going to be trying to get out of your fence to get to the honeysuckle and the poison ivy.
Yeah.
They don't want that. They want to forage. They like the weedy stuff that nothing else wants to eat. That's why they're a perfect companion animal to run, I feel like, with cattle or horses or even with pigs, as long as you can keep them separate. And they run, separately, or you do that cyclical rotational grazing,
Yep.
a lot like Joel Salatin does, running
Sure.
hogs, sheep, and cattle.
Yeah. And chickens right behind
And
them.
chickens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, did you plant fields for them to eat a certain way, or do you just feed them?
They get whatever grows up out there. Now we do bring in hay because with dairy goats, you're going to get the more bang for your buck from what you give them.
Yeah.
Now that doesn't mean that I don't pay attention to who my thrifty does are. I do a lot of milk testing. I'm a part of the Dairy Herd Improvement Registry. And what that means is that I milk my goats, I test their milk, I send it into a lab, and the lab sends back paperwork to me telling me the contents in my milk. And it also helps me to understand my breeding program here as to figure out who can produce the most amount of milk on the same feed ration with the same management practices. And it kind of helps me to go through my herd and to cull out members. And for anybody that gets squeamish when they hear that word cull just means they go on to be a backyard milker. They're no longer in my herd management system. I am breeding to get a small, compact little Nigerian dwarf that looks like a dairy goat, produces milk, because I'm a little bit of an advocate for this breed. And I could talk your head off. I don't know if your listeners would want to listen about that, but I could talk your head off on how the Nigerian dwarf breed has just been so watered down, and the market is so saturated because of the blue eyes, the moon spots, the color variations. They're cute, they're small, but they're losing that general fact that they were meant to be a dairy goat breed.
Yeah.
They should be producing milk, which means that they should have a high, tight udder. They should have lots of capacity. They should have appropriately placed teats that are hand milkable. They shouldn't be tiny. That their body conformation should be a specific way to promote productivity within that animal. Whereas a lot of people say, is it polled? Is it blue-eyed? Does it have moon spots? I'm like, I don't care about that here. It's cherry on the top.
Do they produce milk? That's the important part. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like, that's not what they're here for, you know,
Right.
that especially when it comes to like those dairy goat products that we're wanting. A lot of people like dairy goats because of the high butterfat content in comparison to the quality and the amount of milk that they make.
Right.
If I am milk testing and I have someone who's really lacking in that area, it means that I'm not going to get as much cheese. I'm not going to get as much butter. It's not going to be as soothing of a material to put into milks for skin conditioning. That is really, really important. Not to mention those milk tests tell me if I've got mastitis getting ready to start in my herd and that I can proactively treat, or if I maybe have someone who's starting to get sick because they've dropped, or it might even tell me that I've got someone who's getting ready to go into a reproductive cycle because sometimes milk productions drop then. So it is really playing detective work with these tests. And I think that's probably why I've really how would I say it, just been drawn into the dairy goat world so very quickly. I've only had Nigerian dwarfs. I think this is my 4th year, but I had boars 6 years prior to that. And the meat production is totally different. Talked circles around your head on that market for breeding stock. But I really have loved dairy goats, and I've really loved how easy they are to work with. And I love the Nigerian dwarfs because they're small. They really are a perfect homesteading goat because of their size and their impact on their general environment and the permaculture benefits that come from that. We actually just moved our in-ground garden into our goat pen. I know that sounds insane. Why would you move your in-ground garden in with your goat pen? It's like Fort Knox in there, number one. They cannot get in, but we've run them so long over that specific patch of ground that their cool manures and everything that they've done that's been beneficial for our land is now being reaped in the crops that we sow there that are for our family or for our community. So for us, it's just been very, very cyclical to have them as part of our farm. I'm sorry. I went on and on.
No, you're fine. I love the idea that, you know, just, it's not just about producing a product for you, but you're actually letting those goats do work for you and basically heal your land and, you know, feed you even vegetables that way, you know.
Yeah,
I mean, so they're working for you. I'm a big proponent of that, of, you know, using these animals to do just provide a thing for you, you know, put them to work and let them do the things that, you know, that they were put on this planet to do. I mean, you know, pig will root, a chicken will scratch, a goat will drop. You know, it's a valuable manure. So
but isn't that like the coolest thing when you're talking to new homesteaders, when they realize that the things that they're working with like improve their land? I had someone like over here, and I took all of the manure from last year, even though, you know, goats are a cool manure or a cool compost producer, but it can age too and still reap a lot more biological advantages. Put it in our in-ground garden over there, just fed the chickens over it for a month. I didn't have to move it. They spread it for me, you know, like
I guess I didn't even know that goats, like a rabbit, produce a cold manure, so you can put it directly on a garden then.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it benefits from cooling down, but it is cool compost, just like a rabbit's. And actually, we run Muscovy ducks too. And that's one of the reasons I chose Muscovy ducks, is because they're not technically part of the duck family. They're more of like a roosting duck or a goose.
Yeah.
And their compost is much cooler than the average duck. And I literally take their manure and their straw and I use that as mulch, like over my entire garden, straight from the coop. And it has never burned anything.
Nice.
So we made a lot of our livestock choices based off of the usability of their compost quickly, you know, because then I don't want to have to. There's something that just is so distasteful to me to spend my entire summer and my entire winter. Yeah, like just having to like pick up poop and put it in a pile and to waiting. I am not a patient person. Waiting is just like the worst thing for me. So the thought of having animals where their byproducts, especially their waste, can be removed right away and become useful immediately was super appealing to me.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to wait. I will likely forget about the compost pile in the back corner of the field because it's ugly, it's smelly, and the people that visit are like, oh, there's poop here. Well, yeah, there's farm animals here.
And it's just added labor too. I mean, you just have to get out there and do it. It's just adds.
Yeah, I have to touch it twice that way. This way I touch it one time.
Yeah, if you can get away with not doing that, it's a lot better. I mean, I'm even a big fan of like if you just got enough property, you can put it back there and just let it just sit and not even turn it, because if it sits long enough, you don't have to turn it. It'll still
you don't
turn
have
into
to
usable compost. But you know, if you got the room for that and a place to do that, that's even great, because there's a lot of work to turn in compost. I mean, you will get it quick doing that, but it's a lot of work. And
it is.
Yeah, it sounds like you got quite a system there, just getting it directly to where it needs to be and using it, which is great. So you're running, so you got the Muscovy ducks, you have some chickens. So, I mean, are you doing those are those more of a homestead scale, or are you doing like actually farm production with those as well?
They're more of a homestead scale, but I let them kind of do what they want to do.
Yeah.
Just because like, even like just a chicken running loose on your property, like the benefits of the insect control and the added nitrates to your grass and the aerating of your soil, there's a lot of benefits to that. But if you let animals just run wild on your property, I'm lucky. I don't have to worry about neighbors here. Most of the time, but I mean, then predators become an issue, you know, absolutely. But I find the benefits of letting them live like their natural lives in a controlled environment is a lot more beneficial for them. And it's really beneficial for me. My egg production goes way high when they're foraging and they're doing a lot of their free ranging. And I know that's because they're getting a lot of the nutrients that the stewardship of my land is giving them. But I also want to think it's because they're happy. You know, I'm not going to be that person that's like, live in your coop and produce and produce and produce, because as a homesteader, that's not what it's about. Like this permaculture and this relationship that you build with the livestock and the living beings that are in your soil and that are a part of your garden, whether it be bees or the good bugs or the bad bugs. I mean, it is just so beautiful how they all lend their hand to each other. And the way that I've looked at like homesteading, I want to leave my land that if I were to just up and die in the garden, that the garden would just consume me, you know, and it would go on and it would keep producing because I've chosen heirloom crops, and my animals would be able to move freely throughout it and create their own progeny. And through that, you know, Mother Nature creates better, bigger, stronger animals that are more suited for their environments.
Absolutely.
I think that's one of the things like with factory agriculture that we've painted ourselves into a corner. You have people now that have livestock and they're like, well, I don't understand why they get so sick, or I don't understand why it works this way, or I have to give them that. And I'm like, because you're asking these animals that have evolved over thousands and thousands of years, and we've put them in these situations and domesticated them, and we're asking them to do something that naturally those thousands of years have taught them to do. And we're asking them to do something completely different and still be productive and still be happy in the way that we want it done. And I think that's why the homesteading movement now is so wholesome with rotational grazing, the permaculture. And I think that's why you have such a tsunami of people wanting to come back to it.
Yeah.
And
we definitely need to get into that here in a few minutes.
Oh, yeah.
First, I wanted to ask you though about like, okay, you started with the bare land. I'm fascinated by this, by the way, that you bought a cornfield and started Homestead. Would you do that again if you were starting over, or what would you do something different, or what kind of things would you do differently?
My entire life, I would do that again.
Yeah.
You know, like if I were young my entire life, I would do that again. We are very blessed. Like we have, since we grew up in this lifestyle, a lot of that knowledge came with us. So I find that we had a huge advantage in that way.
Yeah.
Whereas the people that are coming into it now, they might not have the knowledge of knowing like, hey, you gotta dig your fence post below the frost line per your region. Like you can't just dig it tired. Like it has to go a certain amount down, and you have to be able to read the topography of your land. You don't want to put your barn in a low spot because you don't want your barn to flood every time you get a good, so if I could start over, would I do raw land again? That is such a unique question. I have not been asked that. And I think I would say, yeah, yes and no.
Yeah.
Yes and no. And the reason is because there's something very wonderful about taking something raw and being able to make it like your dream homestead.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like there's no parameters. The barn already sits here, so we have to work around this, or this house is already sitting like where I would have wanted the garden. But no, because like I know that per nature, like I'm just going to get older and fatter and slower. And
you just said you weren't a very patient person. So
I'm not a patient person,
patience would be required on something like that. You got to wait for trees to grow. You know, wait for these plants to develop. Yeah. I mean, it takes a while.
Yeah, exactly. And I find myself already at the ripe age of 35 feeling, a lot more tired than when I first put in all of these fence posts with my husband, or, the first couple years of trimming goat hooves where it was only 10 or 15. Now I'm like at 50 where I'm like, I got to split this up over a couple of days.
Ripe age of 35. That
35. I know. I got
a daughter turning 32 this weekend. So I don't know if I want to call that ripe age, but yeah.
Everybody said it though. They're like, when you turn 30, it all changes. I'm like, I bet you'll say that when I turn 40 too.
Oh yeah. It's every 10 years. It's something good. Something changes every 10 years.
Yeah. Like it's the nature of the beast. This is what's going to happen. Yeah. But, because of, Mother Nature aging me and making me feel slower and not so fit. No, but the beauty of just building something that's all your own.
I get that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was wondering about that. I mean, obviously we all it's hindsight changes everything. We look back and we go, okay, I would have done this different, but then I might not have done this different because I learned some things from it that, that I wouldn't have learned had I not went through that too. So there's just things, it's hard to say that you would do things different because you wouldn't be in the same place if you did it different. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't gain that knowledge, I think.
Oh yeah. I mean, you're exactly right. And even the people within this niche and this community that are well known, like Joel Salatin. Mm-hmm. I mean, he had to go through years of experience to become the wealth of knowledge that he is now. Like, I love listening to that man talk about things because he knows how to make it very poetic, but it's straight to the point. I think when I was at the Homesteaders of America conference for the first time and heard him and Daniel Salatin talk about the rogue animal.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I mean, if I only have to catch the goat, and it only takes me 3 minutes, then it's really not that big of a deal. He's like, yeah, but 3 minutes every single day for the rest of your life. Like, you have that one goat. He's like, where would that time, he's like, it matters, those little things that can help you or save your time.
Like turning compost.
Matter. But, his years of experience of lost time gave him that ability to articulate that to where it's very understandable for the rest of us. So I guess that's just part of it. We got to be old and we've got to go through it and get that experience, and then we can be useful to the next generation behind us.
Yeah. And there's just certain things that, you learn by your own mistakes, but it's also a lot nice to learn from the mistakes of others too. And when they tell you about it, which is why I love that you have a YouTube channel, because you get to share your experiences, and then some people get to learn from your mistakes without actually having to make those mistakes. So you can actually learn that way too. And
absolutely.
Talk about your YouTube channel a little bit. What inspired you to start a YouTube channel?
I without being like that weird person, I just felt very called to do it. I was listening to lots of YouTube channels, and it was actually Sandy Brock. I know exactly the moment that I decided I'm going to do this because there's just something so beautiful about what this person just said. And it's going to sound super selfish. But she'd actually just hit a milestone. Her channel is Sandy Brock, Sheepishly Me. She runs a big sheep operation up in Canada. I hate sheep, which is hilarious. Sheep and goat people, we don't see eye to eye, but I really love her. And, she was saying into her camera lens that she's like, it's not easy for me to share these moments with you. And she's like, it's been very revealing to share moments that I lived in with you. She's like, because when I'm in those moments, like, I don't see the beauty around me, or I don't see the perseverance that I'm putting out, or the outcomes right then and there. She's like, but when I go back and I watch it, or I'm editing it, she's like, it has just helped me to feel so much more at home in my own skin with what I'm doing. Yeah. And there was just something like so poetic about that.
Yeah.
And I was just very inspired by her. She jumps into situations head first. And I was actually talking to one of my friends, like, well, you do that too. You know, like you, with your goats, you just dive right in. She's like, I've seen you do it before. You don't think, you just act. She's like, if you've got a camera, maybe you could do that. And that's really where it all started, but it's sometimes not the funnest, you know?
That's great. There's a lot of people doing it. I mean, YouTube's
saturated.
That's the thing now. It's like, it's saturated. There's a lot of people doing it, but there's some really good stuff out there. And I still tell you what, I learn. I mean, every week I'll watch some videos that I learn something from and gain from other people's experiences and mistakes and
absolutely.
And, their successes as well. And I mean, I would say half of what I know about anything probably came from YouTube, and I can't imagine not having that resource. I mean, I grew up without that resource. Obviously, I'm in my 50s, and I grew up without that resource. But that has been such a benefit to my life now. YouTube, podcasts, the books that we have, the things that weren't available 40 years ago, like they are now. It's quite a resource, and I think most people do realize that and appreciate that. So, but that wouldn't be there if it wasn't for people like you and me. I mean, doing a podcast or whatnot. Nice to have people doing things that they can, share that information. So I'm always thankful for folks that are willing to do it. YouTube's hard for me. I have a hard time staying up with YouTube.
I think someone would be lying to you if you just said it was like super, super easy for them. Last year at Homesteaders of America, I had the chance, to talk to some bigger YouTubers, and a lot of them said the same thing, like, just keep going. They're like, it's going to feel like you're banging your head against the wall, or that it doesn't make sense, or you might feel like you need to talk about something, but it feels stupid at the moment to keep that in your video. And she's like, I keep those moments in my video. She's like, because those are the moments that people comment about, like, I needed to hear this. I needed to see this. This saved my animal. I'm like, you drive a hard bargain there, I mean, it can be very soul bearing to share what you're doing on YouTube. Actually, like, I saved my first kid from hypoglycemia because of learning from someone else on YouTube. I'm like, I have dextrose, I have the needles, I know that's what's going on. I'm going to do this treatment, I'm going to film it, and I'm going to tell that person, hey, I found this at this YouTube channel and it saved my animal, because it did. It's good to reap things like that.
Absolutely. And you're doing a great job of it. I mean, you're keeping it up. You're putting out quite a few videos. I mean, how often do you put out videos? I was looking through your
I try to do at least one a week. Sometimes it's two if I'm feeling really good. But man, back when I first started, it was like 3 or 4 videos.
You've been doing it a while too. So, I mean, you got quite an inventory of videos there. So you got a lot of information.
Yeah, we just hit 3,000 subscribers this week. So I was really happy. It's a drop in the bucket compared to, some of like the bigger YouTubers. Yeah. I'm happy to celebrate that.
Put 3,000 people in a room and speak to them. That's a lot of people.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
A lot of people. So, you definitely feel different when they're all standing in front of you than you would feel watching you on the screen. But yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. Well, a lot of people do it for a lot of different reasons. And it's kind of the same thing. I mean, I felt when I was starting a podcast, it was kind of like that too. It's like, man, I got information I want to share. I want to see people. For me, it was urban homesteading. It's like, I didn't think you could do it. And then once I figured out how much I could actually do, it's like, I got to get this message out there, because there's a lot of people that are going, oh, one day I want to start a homestead. And they just keep putting it off, and they may never do it. I want people to know you can do a ton right where you're at. So that was a big thing for me starting. And of course it expanded and got a bit bigger and different over time, but that was the main reason. I just had a passion to get that word out. And it sounds like you have a similar passion to get that word out and teach people and show people how it's done and stuff. So that's great. Now I made contact with you at first because of Rhonda Fowler, who I just interviewed on the podcast, and you're both organizers of the Indiana Homesteading Conference.
Yeah, and we are.
Yeah. So that's pretty neat. And, how did that come to be for you? I mean, how did you get involved with being an organizer for that conference?
That's another, like, I don't mean to go silent on that, but it's, and this is just practicing faith over fear, but it was just kind of a God thing for me. Yeah. And I really try to, I get fearful talking about things like that, and being very open with faith.
Sounds similar to Rhonda. She basically said the same thing when I talked to her.
Yeah, it really was. I actually had been asked to speak for the first time at a homesteading conference down south. And it was so short notice, and I just couldn't come up with the money to go speak there. Yeah. And I was really bummed about it. And I talked to my husband, like, man, I just really wish there was a way that I could figure out how to get down there and to speak and to be a part of something like this. Cause this is where I really feel like God is calling me to just be a part of this community and to help people to find their pathway through self-sufficiency and to take those first steps.
Yeah.
And it wasn't but like a week later that Rhonda actually just reached out to me through my farm Facebook page. And she says, you know what, do you want to work on a conference with me? It's a homesteading conference. And I was like, yeah. And because really there are things that happen in your life like that, that when God puts something on your doorstep, it's like he knows the desires of your heart. And who am I to turn that away, to say, yeah, you saw me, you saw what I wanted, but I'm good.
I've had several experiences like that over the years.
So it was just one of those moments where you just kind of seize the day and roll with it. And this is just what we've been doing ever since.
So you were involved right off the bat in the first conference last year, right?
Yeah.
So, and this year it looks like it's grown quite a bit. It's going to be a different animal this year.
It is going to be a different animal, which is both very exciting, but extremely frightening. It's very, very frightening.
I mean, I've had a couple conversations with Rhonda, and it sounds like there's a lot on y'all's plate to get done. And just sounds like it's a big task, but it sounds like the right two people are handling that. You guys both have a passion for it. Sure. And I know she is. She is about it.
Super passionate about it.
She is.
We'd have like our phone calls every week, and it's so funny because sometimes I know that we've got topic driven phone calls, but a lot of times it does spin off into why the community needs it so much. I've mentioned Homesteaders of America conference a couple of times just while sitting here because it impacted and it inspired me and gave me motivation to come back and do things differently, to start new things on my farm, new projects. And there are just a lot of people that either can't make that drive or because the tickets sell out like in 2 months that they don't know if they can get the time off of work. So I think seeing things like this pop up regionally throughout the entire United States is extremely important. Especially because you have this mass migration of people coming, what I would say, coming back to touch the grass, to have a connection with the earth that they're living on through homesteading, that people need guidance because it seems really easy, even growing up, watching a farmer plow a field here, because it was just what always happens in Indiana. It's just corn and soybeans as far as the eye can see, always know in April and May, I'm going to watch them seed. And in October and November, I'm going to watch them harvest. And it seems easy. And it has its own battles and difficulties, but I found it's even more so like on a smaller scale because you start to take like a lot more pride in what you're doing and you feel a lot more connected to the harvests that you're reaping, and I feel like if people aren't led or they don't feel like they have a community that they can fall back on or bounce ideas off of or have a chance to sit with somebody or in a crowd of people to listen to somebody tell them, this is how I got where I'm at. Here are the mistakes that I made. It is okay because mistakes are not an end result. They are a tool for the next experience. They're something that you should be carrying with you in your own little, toolbox of things that you've learned through experiences to be able to make sure that that doesn't happen the next time. Or if you see it starting to happen, how you should react to it. And even though social media is super open and people can go and watch things on YouTube, there's so much misinformation out there where it's hard, especially if you're new, because I don't want to say it's just Americans. I want to say like humanity as a whole, we're bad for hearing like one opinion that we kind of agree with and we kind of understand and we stick with it. And we will run our lives by that rather than trying to take a collective and figuring out what's the best way. And I think homesteading has to be a collective because it is so fluid. It doesn't fit in one box. And like you said, you didn't think you could do it on an urban scale. It is not confined to acreage. It can be in your backyard.
Everybody's situation is different and everybody's desire is different too. It's like, what do you actually want from it? And so it's just, it can look completely different for every single person. And then I've been doing this podcast for years and I've had a lot of people on tell me about their homesteads. I don't think I've had any of them that sounded exactly the same. When they're all doing something different, they're all doing it for different reasons. And I love that. That's why I like talking to so many people about their homesteads. Even when I have somebody on that wants to talk about a certain topic, I'm like, let's talk about your journey first. Let's get into that. Let's talk about what you're doing, because it's always different. And I'm always fascinated by that, because it's health. Health reasons might have got them, or just a love of the land might have got them there. A love of a certain animal, or just whatever. I mean, there's always these different reasons. It could just be financial reasons. I mean, there's just I've heard 100 different reasons why people get into homesteading, and then the steps they take in their journey and what they actually do with it in the end. It's always fascinating to me. And I think that might be the difference on why there is seems like this influx of people wanting to go to conferences and events versus just watch it on YouTube too, because there is that variety, and there is on YouTube too, but it's just like meeting that person face to face, hearing other speakers. I don't know. There's something different about it. And there is a lot of people that are wanting to take that step beyond YouTube.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I think that it's important for people to take advantage of those different types of events, and to take those opportunities and realize that it's not just one way. And I feel like the homesteading community, and I will use community a lot when I talk about homesteading, because that's another reason why people really look forward to these events. This can be a very intensely lonely life if you let it be. It can be extremely consuming. And in those seasons where you're just nothing grew right, the livestock that were born on your farm, it was like no matter what you did, you couldn't get any of them to live, or the fox ate every single chicken in your chicken coop before you could get out there to defend them. You need to be able to have a community to fall back on that says, hey, brother, sister, been there, done that. Bootstraps, pull them up. Let's keep going. Maybe this approach didn't work for you, but here's my approach, and it's worked for me. And I've been in the same situations that you've been in. And I think when people think of homesteading or being self-sufficient, they focus on that self, and it's so deceptive, because even back when self-sufficiency was the only way to survive, based off of our experiences and our different attributes and all of the different skills that we had, nobody could do all of it themselves, and not all that well if they did. If you had my grandmother used to say, you could be a jack of all trades and a master of none. Yeah. And I'm probably a master of none. I didn't heed her warning. I like to do all the things, but you have to have a community, especially if what we call society were ever to break down. We would have to go back to living like that. I have goats. I can make cheese. You know how to sew clothing. If you put a sewing machine in front of me, don't know what to do with it. I'm not skilled in that way,
I love that too, that there's a community and you can all, help one another, be there for one another, even barter with one another, or, supply one another. I mean, that's a really good thing. And Rhonda talked a lot about that too, when she was on, about, when you go to this conference, which is a statewide conference, but then you kind of find your clique of your county and your people that are right around you. And then you really build a true community that you can be a benefit to one another. And I think that is, you could never get that from YouTube. You're never going to get that from a podcast. Really. You're not going to get that from any kind of social media. You're going to get that from seeing people face to face.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There are bonds that are only forged through being able to hear a genuine tone or reading genuine body language. It's not, how it is on YouTube. I can edit. I can talk and talk and talk for an hour, and I can edit that down flawlessly to 10 minutes. Yeah. And that's it. Whereas in human interaction face to face, you don't get to do that. You really do have the ability to discern another person and to get a feel for them. And that's almost being lost in society nowadays too, because we've got screens in our face all the time, there's nothing wrong with that, in a controlled way, but that shouldn't be the only way that you interact with the world. Right. I mean, that
makes me nervous
lonely,
too, because the edited me is way better than the face-to-face me. So, I mean, I understand what you're saying. Okay. I understand what you're saying though. I mean, it's like you do get that personality, the true personality that you won't necessarily get. Some people share it all. I mean, there are people who just say, I'm putting it out there, whatever I am. I don't care. You're going to get the person you see online is the person you're going to get face to face. And that's great. Absolutely. It doesn't happen often though, because we do tend to want to to hide the parts that we don't feel like, but
Yeah.
sometimes that's the things that people like best about us. What we try to hide because we think
It
it ain't what
is.
they want to see, but that's what they want to see. They want to see the flaws, you know, there's
Yeah.
beauty in the flaws, right?
Yeah.
And people just don't. You're right. I think we've forgotten that. You know, we want this edited version of us being out there. All
Oh,
the
yeah.
time.
Yeah, 100%. It's funny you brought that up, though, because my husband, I was actually editing the video that I released. I think it was last week. And it was just like, I felt like I had failed, you know, and there are certain parts of what happens on a farm that they're not beautiful and they're not rose colored. And sometimes you're like, that was my fault. And I really don't want to admit, even to myself, that it was my fault. But to be transparent, it's important. But he's like, well, don't worry. That'll be a well-viewed video because misery loves company. People love to see when other people fail. He's like, and it's not always because like they love to see terrible things go wrong. It's because of the rawness that's there and sharing it, because it's like, this does happen. I mean, I've talked to, I don't know how many new goat owners were like, I just didn't realize that they could get sick. I didn't realize that this could happen to them. And it's like, because you've looked at certain things or you followed certain people that have only shown you the wonderfulness they bring into your life, because they bring you a lot of joy. But there's just a lot that goes wrong naturally too, that sometimes we can prevent it. And sometimes we just have to write it off that stinks. It happened. I'm taking notes. I'm not going to let it happen again if I can.
I shared on the podcast one time that, I was raising rabbits in a colony and they was just dropping dead right and left of coccidiosis. And I didn't know what to do. And I ended up getting away from rabbits for a while. And I'm sharing all this, and I think people appreciated the fact I was sharing that because there were other people having that same issue and they didn't know what they could do about it either. Yeah. And I didn't know at the time, flash forward a while, figured out the problem. You having them in the ground together in one spot all the time, fix that problem and never had that problem again, and it was just like, if you share those struggles, people, because nobody else is really saying, well, I'm dealing with that too, but they are, and they're appreciative when they hear what the issue is, Yeah. And it's like that with everything. It's like a garden, it's like you got aphids taking over, hornworms taking over, whatever. I mean, you just talk about those struggles because everybody's got them, just not everybody's talking about them, right?
Oh, absolutely. And they're definitely not posting pictures on Facebook or Instagram saying, look at my ate-up garden that was totally preventable had I done
nobody
research.
talks about the dead plants, right? They just talk about, they show that abundant harvest. Nobody shows everything dying out there or the drought killed everything or whatever, but it happens, and
it does.
And I mean, just this year, I was actually sick for a couple of weeks, and I had all these plant starts in my greenhouse and everything, and I was so sick that I didn't want to do anything. I'm like just laying around, and I wasn't watering. I left things out in the greenhouse instead of bringing them in at night on some cold nights, and everything just like it was start over time because I killed everything.
But see, that's the beauty though in it, is that you knew like, hey, that happened, but you didn't let it defeat you. And I think that's really where people need to.
Late.
Or I mean, like I said, failure is not the end result of an experience. It is a tool for the next, you have to be able to use those as tools. It's when people let them define them. My heart hurts for them because I'm like, that is not who you are, by the way. Like that is very situational. Yeah, it might've been avoidable, but really, I'm going to judge that whole situation on how did you come out on the other end of it? Did you give up or did you keep going? I want people to keep going. You're never going to grow if you can't get past that parameter of feeling uncomfortable. It's when I feel the most uncomfortable in something that I'm doing that I'm like, okay, yes, growth. That's coming. That's what's happening right now. I feel uncomfortable because this is me pushing my boundaries further out, which makes me a more well-rounded person and more suitable to pursue the lifestyle that we live.
I wish I could recognize it more when I'm in the midst of stuff. I usually, in hindsight, look back and notice the growth, but usually when I'm in it, I'm a little more panic-minded, like, oh no.
Yeah, it's retrospective, that's for sure.
Well, you're no doubt are doing some great things. And I love that you're encouraging folks right where they're at to take the steps and learn and have failures and continue on, just forge on, and I love that you're doing that that you're involved with the Indiana Homesteading Conference, because I think it's a great tool for people. And just for a long time, we didn't have any events. Now I'm seeing a few pop up. We're starting to see a lot more pop up here and there.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Yeah, this one's a big one, and a lot of stuff going on, and I can't wait to be there. I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
Oh
And
yeah, absolutely.
I'll get all the information about that in the show notes and everything, because I think I really encourage anybody that's even surrounding states or in Indiana to come to it, because I think it's going to be really good.
Oh yeah, that would be wonderful. I know, speaking of events, I know that there is a Homesteaders meet and greet. It's next weekend, April 29th, and then you have the Patriots Homesteaders Conference. That's the 28th, the 29th, and the 30th. They're both there in the same place. It's going to be awesome. I'm actually going to be at the Patriots Homesteading Conference to speak on dairy goats.
That's down around Seymour, Indiana, or down in that area somewhere, I think.
It's like Scottsburg,
that's
Indiana.
Yeah.
But it's going to be awesome. I love seeing events like that, you know, and I've actually had someone like, do you ever feel like competition because you see events? I'm like, no, I cannot help but just be like so happy to see them and rejoice, because I'm like, good, something for someone who needs it right then and there. They can't wait till October.
I do the same thing with podcasting. You know, I have other podcasters on this podcast all the time. I go on their podcast because I think it's great. You know, it's like, I mean, I think that rising tide raises all ships, and we can, you know, I just want that information out there, you know, and I think it's the same way with conferences. Yeah,
exactly. It bolsters the community. Where I see people hopefully at our conference, I want to see them down there at those conferences too. I want to meet new people. I want to see new faces. And I also want to hug and say hello to old friends from other conferences. You know, like I want it to be a family reunion. That's really how it should be.
Yeah. I think the first time I'd heard of even or got involved in any level with the Indiana Homesteading Conference was I was talking to the folks at Homesteaders of Indiana on Instagram. And I had them on the show, and they're talking about this event, you know, the event you had last year, and how great it was and everything. And I'm like, I didn't even know anything about that. You know, it's like,
you're a really awesome group too. I've taken their classes for actually the soap that I made. I was super scared to do it until I actually took their class in November. And I got to know them through our conference. So really, when you look at that cycle where it's like, you don't get to know anybody, but sometimes through word of mouth. And it's so beautiful. It really is.
Well, I want to point folks to all your social media, and especially your YouTube channel, and of course the link to the Homesteaders, the Indiana Homesteading Conference, and all that. Do you have anything else you want to talk about before we come to a close here?
No, not really. I think the only thing that I just want to reiterate for people is just like, you're not defined by your failures, because there's going to be failures in homesteading.
Absolutely.
Like, absolutely. There's going to be moments where you just don't feel all that great, but just keep going. And one little step is all it takes, you know, one little step is all it takes. Don't measure yourself next to the person down the road or on YouTube. Comparison is the thief of joy. Find joy in what you're doing, and you will be successful.
Awesome. Great word. I think you're absolutely right. Well, Ashley, I really appreciate you coming on, talking with us today. I love what you're doing. Keep it up. And I look forward to meeting you face to face at the conference.
I do too. Thank you so much, Harold, for having me on today. I really appreciate your time, and I appreciate the time of your listeners.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Looking around, I finally see I think I need a change. The rat race, I wanna flee, my world I'll rearrange. I'm getting back to the roots of how it's meant to be. Growing gardens, picking fruit, racing livestock, living free. It's a modern homestead. Build a modern homestead. A lot of folks don't understand why I wanna live this way. They've never eaten from their land like we do here every day. Snapping beans like Grandma did, sitting on her front porch. Hunting and fishing like a kid once you've done all of your chores. It's a modern homestead. Build a modern homestead. Country or city, there's a way to make this change. You gotta start today.